In my last lore video on the remake, I talked about the history of the USG Ishimura. However, soon after publishing the video, a fan of mine known as Alan Lane had posted something very interesting on the Discord with these plaques that show in detail of the various jobs that the Ishimura has pulled off over the years, which one of these looks like a rewrite of the origins of Titan Station. One thing that should be clarified is that one of the logs of Dead Space 2 talks about the CEC using orbital bombardment platforms, which is no longer the case. So in this video we will be looking more in depth as to which jobs the Ishimura had done over the years prior to the Aegis 7 incident. The CEC had begun its initial construction of the USG Ishimura on the 20th of March 2443, and after 3 years of constructing the massive planet cracker, the day had finally come for the USG Ishimura to begin its voyage into the stars on the 7th of March 2446, and after 2 months it had been commissioned to crack open the moon of Titan that had been revolving around the planet Saturn on the 9th of June 2446, and they would complete this task 2 months later on the 29th of August 2446 with a payload of 511.76 billion. After demonstrating the raw power of the USG Ishimura, EarthGov would ask that the center shard be left alone so that a station may be built later down the line, where mining teams could manually mine the rest of the shard, while construction of the soon-to-be government sector would begin. This event had impressed the government so much so that they would invest in the Concordians Extraction Corporation and begin to take them seriously from here on out, allowing them to construct more planet crackers to add to their fleet, with the Ishimura at the helm. The next task of the USG Ishimura would be breaking down a rather large asteroid in the belt that is between Mars and Jupiter. This asteroid would be known as Pallas, and on the 14th of February 2448 they would arrive to begin the first operation in this mission, and soon they would successfully complete the mission with a payload of 312.4 billion. 3 years later, on the 4th of May 2451, the Ishimura would be tasked with breaking down the smallest dwarf planet in our solar system, known as Hygeia, which had been located in the main asteroid belt, same as Pallas had been, with a payload of 127.8 billion. The planet cracker would be successful. On the 2nd of December 2453, the USG Ishimura would be tasked with a very dangerous mission, the first of its career, with carrying out the destruction of the moon that resembled an asteroid that revolved around Mars, what had been Phobos. The asteroid resembling moon would be closer to the planet's surface than any other moon in our solar system, so if one thing was to go wrong, it could put the famous planet cracker at high risk of being destroyed, and the loss of life would be catastrophic to the CEC. However, against all the odds, the crew of the planet's cracking vessel would eventually be successful in collecting the payload of 85.68 billion. In the constellation of Pisces held an asteroid known as Vesta that was located inside of the asteroid belt inside of our own solar system, and once again the USG Ishimura would be commissioned to break it down and the ship would begin the first operations on the 20th of March 2455. And soon after arriving, the crew of the planet's cracker would successfully haul in a payload of 812.4 billion. The last task in this era would push the Ishimura back to her roots with the return to Saturn to crack yet another moon revolving around Saturn, known as Pandora, which had been a moon within one of the outer rings of the planet that was in the shape of a potato. The first operations would begin on the 2nd of June 2457, and soon the planet's cracker would deliver the payload of 462.1 billion to humanity, marking the end to the resource drought. After the first decade of planet cracking, the public would renown the USG Ishimura to be the savior of the colonies for its swift and efficient ability to mine moons, asteroids, and to deliver the goods quicker than any other form of deep space mining in the industry. The CEC would go on to state, "It is with an iron will that they embark on the most daring of all endeavors." Marking the beginning of a new era of deep space mining, the USG Ishimura would be tasked by the CEC to go further than it had gone before, to the edge of the solar system, and to the dwarf planet known as Vada. They would begin the priming sequence of the cracking operation on the 15th of March 2458, and they would soon haul the payload of 425.2 billion back to the colonies to be further processed. Moving further and further away from Earth space, the USG Ishimura would find herself on the outskirts of our own solar system in the Kuiper Belt, which is a ring of icy objects floating in space. The next mission for the planet's cracker would be cracking open a dwarf planet known as Ixon, and they would begin the operation on the 4th of November 2459, where they would return to human space with a payload of 312.4 billion. The Ishimura would then travel to a destination 160 light years away from Earth to the system known as BD Plus 144559. The mission had been to go to an exoplanet that is of similar distance from its sun that Venus is from our own sun. The planet is a gas giant, so this had been an interesting operation for the planet's cracker, considering gas giants are comprised of no solid materials, but mainly gases such as helium and/or hydrogen. However, it could be seen that the CEC had been interested in harvesting the gases or the core of the planet. The Ishimura would begin the operation on the 2nd of December 2460, and they would return to the CEC with a payload of 712.2 billion. The Ishimura would then travel to a system known as 55 Cancri, which consists of 5 planets that orbit very closely around their sun. However, the Ishimura would travel to the planet known as Brahi. The operation would take place on the 11th of July 2461, which the ship would soon haul the payload of 825.3 billion back to human space. Returning to the Kuiper Belt, the Ishimura would soon be granted the mission to crack the dwarf planet known as Make that has a similar diameter of Pluto. The mission would begin on the 15th of January 2463 and would return with a payload of 560.4 billion. Taking the next mission, the USG Ishimura would move towards Uranus, with the goal of cracking the moon known as Miranda, which was the 11th moon of Uranus, and was the 5th largest moon orbiting the planet. The first operation would begin on the 4th of April 2465, and again would return with a payload of 522.1 billion. Going back to the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, the planet's cracker would harvest an asteroid known as Eunomia, which had been a very large asteroid in the main cluster. The operation would begin on the 2nd of January 2467 with a payload of 22.53 billion being taken aboard the USG Ishimura. 2 years later, the Ishimura would return to the asteroid belt to harvest another large asteroid known as Juno, and this would be the last operation of this decade, with the sequence beginning on the 23rd of November 2469. As the Ishimura had completed this task, they would haul into the bays a payload of 92.1 billion. Tori B would be the next in line for a cracking operation which had been a gas giant in the Epsilon DH Tori system. The Ishimura would be on course for the harvesting of this planet, and the first operation would take place on the 28th of March 2470, and once again the crew would add another successful operation to the Ishimura's career with a payload of 519.8 billion. 4 years later, the Ishimura would begin the operation to crack open the gas giant known as WASP-12b that was in the WASP system. They would begin the planet crack operation on the 2nd of September 2474, and they would haul the payload of 652.7 billion back to the colonies. However, 2 years later, the Ishimura would return to the system to crack another gas giant, known as WASP-49b, with the first operation commencing on the 30th of October 2476, and another successful payload would be hauled back with a number of 632.2 billion. The next mission for the USG Ishimura would be traveling to the Kepler system, where they would find the exoplanet known as Kepler 517b, and the first operation would be conducted on the 12th of March 2479, and they would haul a payload of 915.6 billion back to be further processed by the colonies. The final operation to take place in this decade would be on an unknown planet known only as AG in the Eridanus system, which is very suspicious that the planet's number had been left out. Regardless, the operation took place on the 1st of April 2481, bringing back a payload of 850.4 billion. April 1st, eh? Anyone else just think that's just an April Fool's Day joke? If so, then the captain of this era must have been quite the fool. The first mission of this era would be the cracking of an exoplanet known as Toj in the Sagittarius system, where they would initialize the planet crack operation on the 3rd of March 2482, and in the following years they would haul the payload of 256.76 billion back to human space. Following this, the USG Ishimura would move to the system Cancri C, where the first date of operation had been on the 19th of May 2484 on a molten planet of rock and lava called Jansen, and they would soon crack the planet open to find a payload of 526.4 billion, which the planet may not have been much to look at, especially on the surface, but the payment was very beautiful indeed. On the 5th of September 2487, the first point of contact would begin on the extrasolar planet known as Arion B in the Delphini system, which would be another gold mine of riches with a payload of 558.2 billion, which had been another gold mine for the USG Ishimura to collect upon. moving over towards another planet that had been prepared for a planet cracking procedures. The USG Ishimura would begin the crack on the 22nd of February 2289 on another extrasolar planet called BD 1763b in the Cetus system, and the payload would tally up to 85.66 billion. Another extrasolar planet would be next on the chopping block in the ARA system, with the planet being known as MU-ARA-EB. The planet crack would initialize on the 8th of January 2490, with the payload measuring up to 281.24 billion. The next destination for the planet cracker would be the Tau system, where on the 15th of November 2490, Tau Grus would be soon cracked, which had been an extrasolar planet. The total payload for this job had been 127.1 billion. The next planet to be ripped apart in the planet cracking procedures would be the planet of Nikoi, which is presumably another extrasolar planet in the system XO. The date of the first operation would be on the 27th of June 2491, with the payload consisting of 182.5 billion. The final reports for this era would be with the cracking of the planet Rio Indi b, which had been a massive planet with the size doubling the mass of Jupiter that had just been outside of the habitable zone of the Ryoko system. The date of the planet's crack had been on the 29th of January 2493, and the payload would be 561.5 billion. In the system of HD 28S8, a planet known as Garani had been marked for a planet cracking operation by the USG Ishimura, where the crack would initiate on the 15th of May 2494, which had yielded a payload of 297.2 billion. In the system of Aquili, on the 11th planet called 11 Aquili, the USG Ishimura would be set to harvest another gas giant on the 12th of December 2495, which after being successful, the planet would yield a payload of 432.4 billion. On the 1st of May 2497, the Ishimura would begin cracking an extrasolar planet called Theseus in the system known as Pollux, which would yield a payload of 512.2 billion. The next task for the USG Ishimura had been to crack open the exoplanet Hypatia, which the date for this task would arrive on the 20th of March 2499, that would come with the payload of 315.5 billion, marking a nice end to the millennium. 4 years later, on the dwarf planet known as Orcus, which had been known as the anti-Pluto, which had been rich with water and ice. The planet's crack would initialize on the 23rd of April 2503, and after the Ishimura had been successful in this endeavor, they would tally the resources up to 150.4 billion. Coming back to our solar system, the USG Ishimura would go to Neptune this time, with the mission of cracking the moon Triton that had been one of 13 moons orbiting Neptune, and on the 21st of May 2505, the planet's cracker would be able to mark another entry in its long career with a payload that consisted of 392.1 billion. On the 27th of February 2506, the USG Ishimura would pay a visit to the system of HAT P1b, where they would begin another planet cracking operation, and the payload for this find would yield 178.9 billion. However, at this time the CEC had breached the governmental order surrounding the Cygnus system and had found a planet known as Aegis 7 that had come back with hide deposits that had been too much to lure them in, and they had begun setting up a colony on the 11th of November 2507, and a year later they discovered that they had not been alone, that a holy artifact had been buried there. The red marker would be found in 2508. The CEC and the church would have the finest of their fleet, the USG Ishimura, to crack the planet, harvesting the materials and minerals for the CEC and to deliver the marker to the church. However, as soon as the planet's crack had begun, all contact with the colony and the ship had ceased. The CEC began to see red flags in the standard procedures, and the loss of contact wasn't at all like the crew. So they began to organize an emergency response team together to check on the USG Ishimura and her crew. However, they soon found the disturbing and terrifying remains of the crew, and that the Ishimura now had truly become a ship of the damned. And that is it for the history of the USG Ishimura's career. And if you would like to find out what happened next, then check out the previous lore video I had done, where I went through the history of the ship in lesser detail than this one. But I do have one thing to say. This service record puts a lot of things into perspective of the true tragedy of the USG Ishimura and the crew who had manned her. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then hit the like button, comment your thoughts down below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sign up to join the British Alliance today by hitting the subscribe button and ringing in the notification bell to receive all updates from the channel. A special thank you to all of my channel members for your extra mile support. It certainly does help in content creation, and I appreciate all of you. And if you would like to become a member today and share in the exclusive benefits, then hit the join button and see which of the tiers sounds right for you. And I will see all of you among the cosmos, and be sure to have a good one.